The threat board showed all 4 alert tiers at once, and Warden Prime Vrel had no protocol for what he was seeing on the feed. He had been in the command observation suite for 11 minutes. He had not moved from the feed in 9. The board behind him ran from amber through red to the 2 upper categories that, in 31 years of service, he had seen lit individually on 3 occasions each and never simultaneously. And none of that was the part that had stopped him. The part that had stopped him was the researcher. She was sitting cross-legged on the refectory floor. She had a field log open across one knee. Her left hand rested on the dorsal plate of the nearest cub, not gripping, not restraining, just resting, the way someone rests a hand on a desk while they read. The cub was not displaying. None of them were. All 3, each one measuring roughly 110 kilograms with plates still hardening and eyes too large for their skulls, were arranged around her in various configurations of stillness. She turned a page. No display, no threat response, no retreat. Vrel checked the database entry again. He had checked it 4 times. Class 6 juvenile tier, restricted contact, 0 successful non-maternal approaches in 200 years of documented research. That was what the database said. That was what every database said. He looked at the feed. He looked at the database. He looked at the feed. The wrong detail was this. Her pocket was visibly full. Something was wedged in the left pocket of her field jacket, a ration wrapper by the shape, and she had not thought to remove it before entering, which meant she had not considered this an entry that required preparation. She had walked in. She had sat down. The 3 most dangerous juvenile organisms in the Waystation Varath catalog were arranged around her like furniture, and she was reading. He opened a comm line to Director Vosren. "Say that again." "The researcher," Vrel said. "She is in Bay 12 South with the cubs." A pause, with the enclosure barrier between them. "No." Another pause, different in quality. "The barrier is down. The barrier is functional." She went through the access point. The silence after that one lasted long enough that Vrel checked the comm to make sure it was still open. It was. Director Vosren's voice, when it came back, had dropped into a register he had not heard from her before, something below her normal authority tone, closer to the way people spoke when they were trying to be precise, because precision was the only thing left. She walked in. "Yes." "How long ago?" 43 minutes before I was flagged. I have been observing for 11. Another silence. On the feed, the researcher turned another page. The largest cub shifted, resettled, and placed its head approximately 4 centimeters from her knee. She did not look up. "Send me the feed," Vosren said. "Sent." He waited. He knew the exact moment she saw it because she said, quietly and to no one in particular, a word that did not appear anywhere in standard authority communications protocol. "Someone," she said after a moment, "is going to need to explain this to me." Vrel opened his incident log. He typed, "Containment failure ongoing." He pulled up the response drop-down. 847 options populated the field. He scrolled further. There was no option for researcher appears content. There was no option for juveniles displaying apparent social behavior toward non-maternal contact. There was a field for researcher distress, 4 fields for various states of physical harm, and a long subcategory for psychological impact assessment that he could open later. The title field at the top of the log stayed blank. In 31 years, the title field had never stayed blank. He left it. 3 weeks earlier, Neva Saul had arrived on the 600 transit with 2 duffel bags, a data tablet, and a filed assignment acknowledgement that listed her posting as routine species interaction, observation only. The intake officer had stamped it without reading it. Vrel had not read it either. There were, on any given week, between 14 and 20 researchers moving through Varath Dome, and Neva Saul's file had been routed to the secondary queue because her clearance was standard class, and her stated specialty, juvenile behavioral adaptation in high-threat species, did not intersect with any active critical protocols. She had collected her room assignment and her station orientation packet. She had asked the intake officer where the commissary was. She had walked the east corridor toward the research wing, and somewhere along that corridor she had passed the observation window for Bay 12 South. Her field log, Vrel would read it later, all of it, and he would not enjoy the experience, recorded the following for Day 1. B12S Cubs, 3, plates still hardening. Eyes very large, sat outside the barrier for about 40 minutes. They came to the barrier side eventually. Did not log as incident, no barrier contact, no vocalization escalation, just proximity interest. Will return tomorrow. She had not logged it as an incident. The file had sat in the research database, open, accessible to 47 personnel with standard clearance, for 3 weeks. Nobody had opened it. The station had a smell ozone from the filtration arrays and something underneath it that the Drevhari considered territorial, a muscan mineral scent that came from the glands along the jaw and never fully left the air in the research wing no matter how often the scrubbers ran. Neva had noted it on day 1. Olfactory marking, probably stress compound, should habituate within the week. She had been right. By day 4, her log stopped mentioning it. On day 3, she had sat down outside the barrier again. The cubs had come to the barrier side within 6 minutes, faster than day 1. She had noted the time. She had noted the cortisol analog readings from the enclosure monitors, which she had apparently pulled access to without telling anyone, and which showed a drop from the critical range to near baseline within 8 hours of her second visit. She had written, consistent non-fear-presenting proximity seems to be doing something. We'll keep showing up the same way and see. That was day 3. She sat down on day 4. On day 5. On day 6, she had apparently reached through the barrier to retrieve a stylus she had dropped, and the nearest cub had sniffed her hand and gone back to what it was doing, and she had logged this as minor contact, non-escalating. Cub seemed mostly interested in the stylus smell. She had included a small notation in brackets. The stylus smells like the protein ration I had for lunch, in fairness. Vrel read that bracket later and sat with it for a moment. On day 14, she had gone through the access point. She had sat down, she had opened her field log. She had not announced this to anyone. The cubs, across 3 weeks of the same calm presence arriving at the same time in the same way, had apparently decided the shape of her was safe. Not confused safe, not threat-suppressed safe. Simply safe, the way a place you have been many times without anything bad happening eventually stops feeling like a place where bad things might happen. She sat down, she opened her log. She did not announce this to anyone. The first alarm had gone off at 8:47 on a Tuesday. Vrel had been at his desk reviewing the quarterly maintenance schedule for the outer docking rings when the panel lit. He had looked at it. He had looked at it again. He had crossed the suite to the feed station and pulled up Bay 12 South and stood there for approximately 4 seconds before opening the comm to his security team. Lieutenant Peth Soren's voice came back clipped and clean, the way it always did. Affirmative, Warden Prime, feed confirmed, standing by for protocol assignment. Vrel looked at the feed. The researcher, Sol, Neva, standard class clearance, routine species interaction, was cross-legged on the floor with 3 Class 6 juveniles arranged around her, and a field log open across her knee. The largest cub had one forelimb resting across her shin. She had not appeared to notice this. She was writing something. Auditory separation protocol, Vrel said. Affirmative. The maternal distress signal ran at 18,000 Hz, above the range of human hearing, below the range that caused structural damage to station equipment, precisely calibrated to produce a flight response in Drevhari juveniles by triggering the neurological pathway associated with maternal alarm. The station systems weren't equipped to produce it directly, so the signal ran through the enclosure speakers in Bay 12 South, and the equipment in the monitoring room produced a faint sympathetic buzz as it played, the kind of sound that lived in the back of the teeth rather than the ears. All 3 cubs' earplates rotated toward the speakers. The largest one yawned. Then all 3 went back to watching the researcher turn a page. Soren's report came in 30 seconds later, in the same regulation-clean voice he used for everything. Warden Prime, the juveniles appear to be ignoring the distress signal in favor of watching her turn a page. Vrel's jawbanding did something. He was aware of it without being able to assess it, the way you are aware of your own face doing something you didn't authorize. He noted the seismic monitors were picking up something low and rhythmic from Bay 12 South, not a single signal, but 3, overlapping and slightly out of phase with each other, a frequency that sat at the edge of the monitoring range and registered more as a sensation in the chest than a sound. The system had flagged it as unclassified biological output. He filed a note to look up whether it had a name. He never got around to it. That was the beginning of the list of things he didn't get around to. Round 2, Vrel said. Barrier field deployment, low intensity. The separation field activated in Bay 12 South. A low blue shimmer, barely visible, like heat off a road on a warm day, present for about 3 seconds as the field established itself. It was designed to produce mild neurological discomfort in Drevhari subjects, enough to encourage movement away from the source without triggering a stress response. Non-harmful, precisely calibrated, used successfully in 14 documented Class 4 and Class 5 separation procedures. All 3 cubs walked through it, not around it. Through it, the shimmer parted around their plates and closed behind them, and they settled back into their positions around the researcher, as if the field were a curtain they had simply stepped through. Neva looked up. She looked at the shimmering boundary she was now sitting inside of. She looked at the cubs. She stood up, picked up the smallest one, 110 kilograms, plates still hardening, claws at approximately 70% of adult sharpness, carried it back through the field, set it down on the other side, and sat back down. The cub walked back through the field and sat next to her again. "Those are new," Neva said, to the general direction of the monitoring equipment. "Are you testing something?" The cubs seemed fine with them. Soren had stopped making eye contact with Vrel's jaw. Vrel noticed this and decided not to examine it. 2 rounds down. Both failed. The alert lights in Bay 12 South had been running for 40 minutes, and she had not, at any point, looked at the alert lights. Vrel looked at the incident log. The title field was still blank. There were 847 protocol categories. There was no protocol for this. There was no category for content. He kept scrolling anyway. He was aware this was not useful. He kept scrolling anyway. The comm from Neva came through at 9:34. Her voice had the same quality it always had. From every recording Vrel had since pulled and reviewed, a kind of cheerful practicality that applied the same register to filing paperwork and describing a 110-kilogram apex predator currently sitting on her foot. "Hi, sorry to interrupt. I don't know who's watching the feed right now, but quick question. Does the commissary carry real protein, not the paste? The cubs are not impressed with the paste. I've been sharing my field rations with them, but I'm running low, and honestly they've started looking at the package before I even open it. That's actually pretty interesting. The associative recognition is faster than the published range suggests. But the practical problem is I only packed for one." A pause, a sound of something shifting, the wrapper of a ration bar from the crinkle of it. "Also, I think I might need a bigger field log. I'm almost through this one." Vrel looked at the comm panel. He looked at the feed. He looked at the comm panel again. "We will look into the commissary stock," he said. "Great, thanks. Oh, and the alert lights in here. Are those for me or is something else happening? I can move if I'm in the way." He closed the comm. Specialist Keth had 14 Class 6 incidents on his record. He was the most experienced Drevhari containment specialist currently active in this sector, and he had transported in from Relay Station Dosvel within 4 hours of Vrel's request, carrying a containment kit that represented the current upper limit of biological separation technology available to the authority. He stood at the monitoring feed for 40 seconds without speaking. "Which one is she carrying?" he said. "The smallest," Vrel said. "Approximately 98 kilograms, the other 2 are." "I see them." Another 20 seconds of silence. On the feed, the smallest cub had climbed partially into Neva's lap, which was not structurally practical given the size differential, and she had shifted her field log to accommodate this without looking up from it. "Are those play vocalizations?" "We believe so. The sound analysis is." "I know what play vocalizations sound like." Keth's voice was even, the way voices went even when the person speaking had run out of the particular kind of processing that produced other tones. He watched the feed for another 30 seconds. The largest cub had begun investigating the pocket of Neva's field jacket, the one with the wrapper in it, by pushing its sensor cluster against the fabric in a slow, deliberate way. Neva reached into her jacket, removed a protein ration bar, broke it in half, and held out half without looking up from her log. The cub took it. Keth set his containment kit on the floor. He did not pick it up again. Vrel looked at Keth. Keth was looking at the feed. Vrel looked at the feed. The seismic monitors were still registering the low rhythmic output from all 3 cubs, 3 separate signals, still slightly out of phase, still carrying that quality that lived in the chest rather than the ears. The largest cub's jaw was moving in the slow, deliberate pattern that meant it was eating. Neva had gone back to writing. 14 Class 6 incidents. 400 pages of established Drevhari containment doctrine currently loaded in the kit on the floor. A senior specialist with the most relevant field experience available in this sector, standing in Vrel's command suite with his hands at his sides. Vrel looked at the kit on the floor. He looked at the feed. The nutrition lure drone was already prepped and loaded in Bay 12 South's secondary access corridor. A precision-calibrated delivery system loaded with the highest-grade species-appropriate protein formulation in the biological catalog, engineered to trigger the Drevhari juvenile hunger response at a range of up to 12 meters. It had not been deployed yet. Looking at the feed, looking at Neva breaking a protein ration bar in half and handing it over without breaking her writing stride, looking at the largest cub eating from her hand, while the other 2 arranged themselves around her like something out of a behavioral record that did not exist, Vrel understood, with the particular clarity that arrives when you have run out of better options. that it was not going to work. He did not say this out loud. He was the Warden Prime of Way Station Verath Dome. He stood in the command observation suite with his hands clasped behind his back, and his jaw doing something involuntary and visible on every security camera in the room. "Stand by," he said. Soren said affirmative and did not look at his jaw. The drone was going to deploy. They were going to do this properly. They were going to follow the protocol and document the outcome and move to the next stage, because that was what the protocol said. And the protocol was 400 pages of 200 years of accumulated institutional knowledge, and Specialist Keth's containment kit was on the floor of the command observation suite. And somewhere in Bay 12 South, a researcher with a nearly full field log and an empty ration wrapper in her pocket was sitting cross-legged on the floor with 3 Class 6 juveniles, and had just asked whether they could restock the commissary protein. The drone was going to deploy. It was not going to work. The drone entered Bay 12 South at 9:47, and the Cubs did not look at it. All 3 of them had their attention on Neva, who had opened a second protein ration bar and was breaking it into pieces on the floor between them with the focused generosity of someone feeding ducks at a pond. The largest cub had been sitting with its full weight settled, and its sensor cluster angled toward her hands for the past 4 minutes. Patient, deliberate waiting with a quality that looked nothing like hunger and a great deal like attention. The drone hovered at the bay's midpoint, dispersing its calibrated protein sent across the full 12-meter range, and not one set of ear plates rotated toward it. Neva held out a piece of ration bar. The middle cub took it from her fingers. Director Vosren's voice came through at 9:51. "They prefer the human food," she said, "over species-appropriate nutritional formulation." Vrel waited. "Someone document that I said this," she said. "I want it in the record that I said it out loud on the comm at 9:51 station time, so that later when someone asks how we missed it, there is a timestamp." "Noted," Vrel said. "Which form," Vosren said, "covers a species voluntarily restructuring its diet preference toward human food." Vrel checked. He pulled up the full form index, ran a search on dietary restructuring, found 11 entries for invasive species contamination, and 1 for accidental nutritional conditioning in Class 2 fauna. He ran a second search on voluntary preference shift. 4 results, all for managed breeding programs. "There is no form," he said. Vosren said nothing for a moment. "That tracks," she said, and closed the comm. Vrel looked at the feed. The drone had settled near the bay entrance, its dispersal unit still running, the warm, dense protein scent filling the space according to the dispersion model and being ignored according to no model he had access to. Neva had finished the ration bar. She had gone back to her field log. The smallest cub had curled against her left side. The middle one was asleep. He looked at the drone. He looked at Keth's containment kit on the floor. He looked at Soren, who was looking at the feed with the expression of someone who had filed enough accurate reports today that he felt entitled to simply observe for a moment. Vrel opened a new request in the system. He typed, "Dr. Fethai's H. Behavioral Neurology Drevhari Specialization. Emergency Consult, Way Station Verath Dome. Transit Priority 1. He sent it before he finished reading it back. Dr. Harvin Fethais arrived with 6 sensory stalks, a transport case of monitoring equipment, and a second assistant who appeared to have been pulled from something else, and had not fully caught up on context. Fethais herself moved through the station's transit bay with the efficiency of someone who had spent 40 years in this specific kind of situation, and had learned that the most useful thing to do upon arrival was to look at the actual problem before forming an opinion about it. She looked at the feed for 2 minutes without speaking. Her second assistant pulled up the research database and began cross-referencing behavioral records. The assistant's hand stopped moving after about 30 seconds, then started again, then stopped. "Pull up all filed notes from this researcher," Fethais said. "Sol Neva, standard class clearance, everything she submitted since arrival." The assistant found the folder. "Routine species interaction," he said. "Subcategory, there are," he counted, 214 entries. Fethais looked at Vrel. Vrel looked at the floor. "Start reading," Fethais said. The assistant read. Day 1, proximity interest, no escalation, not logged as incident. Day 2, return visit, cubs moved to barrier side faster. Day 3, the assistant's voice changed slightly, not in a way that was unprofessional, but in the way voices changed when the words being spoken were no longer matching the expected shape of the situation. Day 3, he said, cortisol analogs dropped from critical range to near baseline within 8 hours of consistent non-fear-presenting proximity. Subject appears to be responding to the regularity of the contact as much as the contact itself. writing that down to track. Fethais set down the equipment calibrator she had been adjusting. She wrote that, Fethais said, on day 3. Yes, we are on day 23. The assistant looked up from the log tablet. He looked at Fethais. He looked back at the log. Keep reading, Fethais said. The seismic monitors in Bay 12 South were still registering the low rhythmic output from all 3 cubs. Vrel had pulled up the frequency analysis twice and gotten the same result, 3 distinct signals, overlapping at irregular intervals, each one running at a range that registered more in the chest than in the ears. The system had no classification for it. He had searched the database for Drevhari juvenile vocalizations, low-frequency, multi-individual, simultaneous. 14 results. None described what was on the monitor. He checked the timestamp on the incident log. Routine, the kind of check you made when you had been watching a feed for too long and needed to confirm that time was still passing at the expected rate. 4 hours and 12 minutes since the first alarm. The title field on the log was still blank. From the secondary monitoring station, Fethais' assistant kept reading. Day 7, the largest cub had started waiting by the access side of the barrier before Neva arrived. Earlier each day will track timing. Day 10, she had begun making a specific sound before entering the bay, a low 2-note signal she had apparently developed herself. Cub's ear plates rotate toward it, working on whether this is recognition response or just noise interest. Currently leaning recognition but need more data points. Day 12, the assistant paused. Read silently for a moment. Then read it aloud. Day 12, I think they've started recognizing the sound of my specific footsteps in the corridor. I can't prove this yet, but they were already at the access side when I came in today, and I hadn't made the signal. Either this is footstep recognition or they have a very good internal clock. Leaving a thank you note for whoever reads these, because this is the most interesting thing I've worked on, and it would be a shame if nobody else knew about it. The assistant stopped reading. Nobody spoke. She left a thank you note, Fethais said very quietly to the air above the monitoring station. Vrel's jaw banding had gone fully copper. He was aware of this because Soren had been glancing at it at intervals that were close enough together to be noticeable and far enough apart to maintain procedural dignity. Vrel stopped looking at Soren. He looked at the wall above the feed instead. Fethais had stopped listening to the log entries and was looking at the actual feed now, at Neva, at the cubs, at the arrangement of them in the bay that looked nothing like anything in any behavioral record Fethais had spent 40 years writing. How many people, Fethais said, had access to this database? Vrel already knew the answer. He said it anyway. 47. And how many opened the files? He looked at the access log. He had been avoiding looking at the access log. He looked at it. None, he said. The category was labeled routine species interaction, Fethais said. It was not a question. Yes. Nobody thought, she said slowly, that there would be anything in it worth reading. She looked at the feed for another moment. The middle cub had woken up and was now watching Neva write with the focused intensity of someone watching a very interesting performance. Neva reached out without looking, adjusted the cub's ear plate. Apparently it had been folded at an angle that looked uncomfortable, and went back to writing. The cub made a low sound and settled. 23 days of data, filed, unread, sitting in a database that 47 people had access to and not one had opened. The threat classification pathways, Fethais said. Her voice had shifted. It had started the day in its professional register, precise, citation-ready, the voice of the most published Drevhari behavioral researcher currently working. It had not stayed there. They were not suppressed. This is not confusion. This is not a chemical response to a specific stimulus. She looked at her own monitoring equipment. She looked at the feed. They were restructured, across 3 weeks of the same evidence arriving the same way at the same time. She just kept showing up, every day, the same way. And they learned the shape of that, and then the shape became the safety. Her assistant asked, after a moment, if that was something they could publish. Start with the cortisol data, Fethais said. Don't lead with the SOC. The external sensor alert sounded at 12:03. Not the enclosure alarm, the corridor sensor. Bay 12 South's external access corridor, the one that ran between the research wing and the station's central refectory. Soren checked it. Read the report, read it again. Warden Prime, he said. The adult female has left her bay. Vrel turned from the feed. The external logs show she has been moving toward the station access for approximately, Soren checked. His voice was clean and level. It had been clean and level all day. 6 minutes. 6 minutes. Vrel pulled up the adult female's containment file. It was, as advertised, longer than the station's founding charter, classification history, behavioral records, 4 separate incident reports from her arrival alone. She was the reason Bay 12 South had a reinforced secondary barrier. She was the reason the station's Class 6 protocols had been updated twice in the past decade. She was the reason Vrel had 3 separate escalation procedures loaded in his command panel at any given time, each one corresponding to a different severity of breach. She had not breached. The sensor logs confirmed it. She was walking the corridor, moving slowly, stopping, changing angle, moving again, methodical, like she was choosing her approach. She was almost at the refectory. Soren said, "She is at the refectory viewport," and the words landed in the command suite with the specific weight of a sentence that made the previous 4 hours feel like a very long preamble. Vrel watched the feed. She stopped, she looked in. Through the refectory viewport, through the secondary camera now tracking her from the corridor side. The adult female Drevhari, fully grown, the single largest organism on this station, by a margin that the manifest made very clear, pressing her sensor cluster against the glass. The sensor cluster was the size of a dinner plate. It left a faint fog ring on the viewport where the warmth of it met the cold surface. Inside, through the Bay 12 South feed still running on the secondary screen, Neva, cross-legged on the floor, field log in hand, one pocket full. The 3 cubs arranged around her. The cubs looked up. They called to her, the low query vocalization, not quite sound, more a sensation in the chest at that frequency, the kind of thing you felt in your sternum before you heard it. Then they went back to Neva. Both things could be true. She had not struck. She had not charged. She had walked a corridor and stopped at a window and looked in at her cubs, sitting calm beside a human, and she had not done any of the things 200 years of documentation said she would do. Neva looked up from her log. She looked at the viewport. She stood. She crossed the refectory to the door. She opened it. "Oh," she said, "you came." She said it the way you said it. When a colleague was late to a meeting you had both expected them to attend. The adult female entered. She moved the way very large things moved in tight spaces, careful, deliberate, each step placed before the weight shifted. She crossed the refectory floor and stopped 3 meters from Neva. Her sensor cluster was still active, scanning, the small movements of it processing the space and the human standing in it. Neva did not move back. She stood there with her field log under one arm and her hands at her sides, not raised, not held out, just present, the same posture she had brought to Bay 12 South every day for 23 days. Not performing calm, not working at it, just not alarmed. The adult female's sensor cluster stilled. The 3 cubs moved between them. They went to their mother, made the query vocalization, went back to Neva, went back again, going between the 2 of them in a pattern that had a shape to it, a specific intention, the kind of movement that in any language meant this one, and they are both real. The adult female sat down. Neva sat down across from her. She reached out slowly and placed her hand on the neck plates, the same motion she had learned on the cubs, following the plate edge, not pressing, just present. The adult female's eyes closed. She sat down. She did not strike. The weapon that 200 years of documentation said would fire simply did not fire. That was the whole thing. She sat down. Vrel opened the jaw-banding reference chart. He had pulled it up twice today already, and both times he had been looking for the stress indicators, the threat approach colors, the warning displays he was trained to read. He found what he was looking at now after a moment. There was a color for it. It had a name. He had not known it had a name. He typed on the log tablet. He deleted it. He typed again. He deleted that too. The title field stayed blank. Nobody in the command observation suite spoke for 41 seconds. Vrel counted. He was aware that he was counting and that this was not a productive use of his attention, and he could not stop. Soren's hand was still resting on a control panel he had never activated. Keth's containment kit was still on the floor. Fethai's was making a sound. Not a word, not a professional assessment, just a low, involuntary sound, the kind that preceded speech in the same way a door unlocking preceded opening. Soren had the evacuation plan. Keth had the containment kit. Fethai's had the behavioral database. None of it had helped. The seismic monitors were registering something new from Bay 12 South. Not 3 signals now, 4. The adult female's signal was slower, lower, a long, steady rhythm underneath the 3 cub patterns that had been running all morning. They overlapped. They did not sync. They simply ran alongside each other, and the monitoring system had no classification for it. And the sound lived in the chest rather than the ears. And Vrel stood in the command suite and felt it and did not know what to call it. Fethai's recovered first. She was, after all, the most published researcher in her field, and 40 years had given her a faster recovery time than most. Someone, she said, is going to have to write a report. Vosren's voice came through. She had been on the open comm the whole time. A different kind of report. Yes. I don't think we have the form for this. No, Vrel said. He opened a new file anyway and began to draft it. Fethais finished the research notes at the 3-hour mark, all 214 entries. She sat with the log tablet closed in her hands for a moment, not reading, not speaking, the same way you sat with a book after the last page when you needed a moment before the world came back. Then she set it on the desk. She just kept going back, she said. Every day, the same way, and they learned the shape of that, and then the shape became the safety. She looked at the feed where Neva was still sitting, the adult female now asleep nearby, all 3 cubs arranged across various parts of both of them. That's what 200 years of classification theory missed, not the danger, the consistency. Her assistant asked again if that was publishable. All of it is publishable, Fethais said. Start with the cortisol data, 3 papers minimum. The 4th one I'll write myself. 6 weeks after the incident, the Galactic Biological Hazard Authority issued a revised classification framework. It was long. Most of it was procedural. Buried at page 847 of the supplementary documentation, an accident of alphabetical ordering, not intent, was a new behavioral category. 3 words and a footnote. Conditional affiliation capable, human contact prerequisite. The Drevhari were entry 1. The cub's circadian rhythms had, by that point, fully entrained to Neva's schedule. They woke when she woke. They settled when she settled. First documented case of Drevhari juveniles voluntarily restructuring their sleep patterns to match a non-maternal contact. Fethais's first paper had been published 3 weeks after the incident. Her second came out the week after. 2 universities had added her 4th paper to their curriculum before peer review was complete, because the data could not wait for the normal pace of things. The Thuresi emerged from their burrows for the first time in 4 months. They were small, photosensitive, had not been seen in the lit corridors since the authorities' initial Drevhari intake. The cortisol analog normalization in Bay 12 South had shifted something in the ecosystem threat perception field across 3 adjacent habitat bays. They came out slowly, one at a time, into the corridor light outside the research wing. Nobody had expected that. It was not in any model. The authorities' precision-built juvenile enclosure remained unused. The cubs slept in the refectory adjacent to Neva's quarters. There was a sign on the door handwritten on a piece of field log paper fixed with equipment tape. She had made it herself. It said in plain print, in use. Knock first. 14 station requests arrived from other facilities. 3 of them specified a preference for researchers who showed minimal avoidance response to Class 5 or above species. The wording was careful and bureaucratic and meant exactly one thing. The formal adoption petition arrived on a Tuesday, 3 claw marks in dark ink on pressed hide. Vrel drafted his report over 4 days. He did not write about instincts. He did not write about charm or warmth or the particular quality that made Neva Saul sit down outside an enclosure barrier on her first day and not think it needed to be logged. He wrote about what the data showed. He wrote what the data meant. He wrote it plainly, in the same register he used for incident reports and quarterly maintenance reviews, because that was the register that would be read and taken seriously by the people who needed to read it. Then at the end, he wrote a warning. Humanity's most dangerous trait, he wrote, is not their resilience, not their ability to adapt, not their creativity or their endurance or their capacity to function in conditions that would end most other species. It is this: they believe, persistently and without apparent evidence-based limit, that everything, no matter how lethal, no matter how long classified, no matter how many centuries of documentation say otherwise, just needs a friend. And somehow, he wrote, and somehow they keep being right. He saved it. He opened the incident log. He looked at the 214 entries, every round, every failed protocol, every record of a response that had not worked, every timestamp on the slow institutional failure of the past 3 weeks. He selected all of them. He deleted them. He kept one entry, typed, Contact Protocol, Draft 1. He did not know how to continue it. He sat with the blank space after the title for a while, and then he stopped trying to fill it, because he suspected, with the particular clarity of a man who had spent 4 hours watching a specialist set down his containment kit, that Neva Saul would write most of it herself, cheerfully, between handing out protein rations, with one cub across her shoulders and another attempting to eat the stylus. The command observation suite was quiet. The security feed was still open on the main screen. Bay 12 South. Neva cross-legged on the refectory floor, field log open across her knee, the left pocket of her jacket still visibly full. The 3 cubs arranged around her in various states of sleep, and the adult female settled nearby, her sensor cluster at rest. The seismic monitors were registering something low and rhythmic from all four of them at once. 4 signals, overlapping but not synced, each one running at a frequency that lived in the chest rather than the ears. A sound that, in 200 years of documented research, had never been recorded before and had no name yet. The log tablet on the desk read, Contact Protocol, Draft 1. The title field below it was still blank.